Thank you.
Rick, thank you very much for your leadership on this campaign and for the hopeful news you've imparted, as has Roger. We have a few minutes for questions. I am seeing one from the audience, but let me just ask it, one of my own. And maybe, Roger, you might just amplify on a point that Rick has just made, namely the interest being expressed by elected members of the United States Senate in this initiative. And I'm thinking specifically of something that was unveiled just today by Senator Marco Rubio. Would you talk a little bit about that and its implications as a legislative initiative as well?
Yes, there's been strong bipartisan support for remedial action on the capital markets vis-a-vis China. Unanimous legislation was passed on trying, for example, to delist Chinese companies that are not compliant with PCAOB audits, as they're called, the government auditing function. And there are other examples going back to the thrift savings plan, where we defeated an effort to insert bad actor Chinese companies into the investment portfolios of every federal employee and member of our military that had exposure to any kind of international portfolio. That said, Rubio today introduced legislation, I should have it in front of me with the title, but leave it to say that it's about the American capital market security. And it makes the point, one of the points that I very briefly touched on earlier, that even US sanctioned companies are littering the investment portfolios of scores of millions of unwitting Americans. Now, Rubio is acutely aware of this. We've been in touch with him since the summer of 2018 on this subject continuously. And we did have a meeting of the minds in terms of two forms of sanctions that we have outstanding: the Commerce Department entity list, which you've heard about, as well as this newer Pentagon PLA list, where they are going public with Chinese military companies that pose a danger to the United States. He took both of these lists and added capital markets penalties, teeth, if you will, by stating that if, we had a situation where we were penalizing these companies for national security and human rights abuses on the one hand, and allowing them to stay in our markets and be funded and financed and traded in our capital markets simultaneously. So here we're funding them, while on the trade side we're penalizing them. There was no consistency at all to this, a glaring gap. Well, he sought to fill this by suggesting that if you're now henceforth on the entity list, the blacklist of commerce, if you are ending up on the Pentagon PLA list, that's it for you in the U.S. capital markets. You're out, you're deregistered, you're delisted, and it is against the law for individual to invest in those companies, including their subsidiaries and their overseas presence. That is, this gambit, which is the most favorite of China today, which is to take, and Wall Street, which is in league with them, they take companies from Shenzhen, Shanghai, Hong Kong, they put them into indexes, just add them, hundreds of them at a time. Those are in turn, they build investable vehicles around them called exchange-traded funds, which many of you are familiar with. And they benchmark, as it's called, they mirror those indexes. And they end up in the portfolios of those scores of millions of unwitting Americans I talked about. And they're unregulated. There's no vetting, there's no diligence, there's no compliance with securities laws, there's no material risk disclosure of SEC variety. And he's basically saying, oh, no, 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 no. This unguarded back door into our markets, watching trillions move, that's over. So this is one of the most important legislative developments in history. I mean, there's never been capital markets penalties associated with American sanctions, to my knowledge. Even in Iran, you can't find, in my opinion, a precedent for what happened today. And I would just urge you to pay attention to it and look at it. There's a Reuters piece on it, and this is just the beginning.
Well, and I think to the point of what we all can do about this threat from the Chinese Communist Party, supporting legislation along these lines from Senator Rubio is one very, very important initiative. Brian Kennedy, let me ask you quickly, if I could. There are several other important steps that the Trump administration has taken to date that indicate that they, too, appreciate the importance of the work we've just been discussing. Might you mention what the director of the National Economic Council and the National Security Advisor to the President, respectively Lawrence Kudlow and Robert O'Brien, have been saying to the investor community in several communications in recent months?
Yes, I think that's very important, Frank. Both the National Security Advisor and the National Economic Advisor were warning the retirement funds of the United States that they ought not to be investing the retirement funds in corporations that are doing business in communist China, that they were both a risky investment simply because they were themselves subject to a lot of reputational blowback, but that it was, in a way, morally wrong, too, for American corporations to be investing, to be doing business in these Chinese corporations, and also wrong to be actually taking someone's hard-earned retirement money and putting it in a Chinese company, because in doing so, they were betting on the success, practically speaking, of communist China, which no one would knowingly want to do. But I would say to you, Frank, and to Roger, it does really raise the question and the problem of why are Americans thinking this way? Why is it that an American investment bank would be thinking about taking American dollars and investing them in the success of communist China, given everything communist China is doing today? And that really, I think, is one of our real problems here in this country, that a certain class of American has become corrupt and really inured to the problems of human rights abuses and the threat that communist China presents to America more directly. And I think part of the purpose of this conversation should be to really get at how can Americans ever get to the point where they're investing in the success of a totalitarian regime. And it can't just be money. It has to be something bigger than that. And that's really the kind of thing we want to expose.
Brian, this is a perfect segue to a question from our audience. The issue, and maybe I could ask it of you, Rick Manning, how do we raise awareness about the true danger that this Chinese Communist Party regime represents to the United States, to the free world more generally, but specifically to this country, so as to at least hold very much accountable those who, as Brian has said, are actively enabling, mostly with other people's money, let's be clear, the kinds of threats that we're all talking about in the course of this program.
Frank, thanks for asking. I'm having a hard time doing this in the construct of a 501c3, but let me just do it in the way I can. There's a clear difference in terms of the perspectives of various candidates for office, and one of the people are paying attention right now to those perspectives. And so, if we right now over the next week or two bring out those perspectives and the comparison perspectives without necessarily advocating one or the other. Just by recognizing those perspectives and bringing it to Americans' attention what those perspectives mean, I think we have a capacity to really dramatically increase knowledge. What's more, I think the national media is almost impossible to ignore some of the roles that China is playing in terms of their involvement with various politicians in America. And as a result, people are becoming more and more concerned about what China is doing. And so into this we flow with really telling a story about the abuses that occurred, the people who've been victimized, and the real truth of it. I'll give you a simple example. This morning I was on the radio in Birmingham, Alabama, and it was all about China. And I was asked about what was happening in China, and I had about 2 minutes. And so I took the most important thing I could think of, and that is the forced organ harvesting that happens in China. And I explained what that meant very clearly in a short period of time. And the host literally said, "Whoa, that's horrible," and shocked him to the point where I'm back on tomorrow, talking, I guess on Thursday, talking about it. And that's what we have to do. We have to tell the truth, varnish truth. When Americans hear it, it rips away all the facade. It forces us to deal with what's real. And I think through the conservative talk radio network in particular, we have a real strong opportunity to drive this message to a large number of Americans, totally bypassing the establishment media that puts a black cap on.
Rick Manning, thank you. Your timing is perfect, as was the send-up for the next part of this program. I'm very pleased to introduce a man that has been an incredible blessing to the Committee on the Present Danger of China. There would be, I think it's fair to say, no Captive Nations coalition were it not for the very hard work of Se-Hun Kim, our campaign coordinator on this effort. He will take over at this point and introduce several of our contributors from Captive Nations that will help, we hope, add both detailed information concerning things like the forced organ harvesting, I call it organ genocide, that is a characteristic of the Chinese Communist Party. Se-Hun Kim, thank you for your leadership, and over to you.
Thank you, Frank, and thank you, everybody, for your time today. And thank you to everyone that's participating as part of our audiences. The time that we're facing at this point is a lot more important than a lot of people we would like to realize, but we are changing that slowly but surely. Today, I am privileged and honored to introduce members from each of the nations that either have been taken over by the Chinese Communist Party and are under a very great threat of being taken over by the CCP and getting their sovereignty taken away. And so without further ado, I would like to introduce our panelists that will be providing these information to everyone today regarding the works of the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, and what they have done to these captive nations for the past couple of decades. And let me also make something clear, is that the panelists that have participated today are actually really no different than all of us, except that they have stories and they have testimonies that I believe will be a game changer in the hearts of many that's out there. So without further ado, firstly, we will have Mr. Tenzin Sampo from the U.S. Tibet Committee to introduce us about the CCP's work in Tibet, which is something that has been known to us for many, many years now out in the West and really the rest of the world, especially through His Holiness, the work of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And after that, we will have Mr. Ilshad Hassan, who is the director of the China Affairs sector in the World Uyghur Congress. And Mr. Ilshad Hassan, let me also say that I have been a huge fan of his work for many years now. He has been an extremely well-known Uyghur scholar who was able to mentor many, many people throughout the years. Following that, we will have Mr. Inkibat Tokchok, who is the director of the Southern Mongolian Human Rights and Information Center, and his work has been critical in introducing and to maintaining the exposure of the Southern Mongolian situation under the hands of the Chinese Communist Party for many years now. And it is our privilege and honor to have him here to talk to us about the erasure of the culture, the erasure of culture of the Southern Mongolians that's happening today. After that, we will have Dr. Sean Lin, who is the advisor to Doctors Against War.
Sehun, maybe it would be best to just do a quick introduction before each of them speak, because this becomes a bit of a blur. So why don't we get started with three that you've already introduced, and then we'll pick up and introduce the next one. Say Sean Lin.
Sure. So without further ado, we'd like to welcome Mr. Tenzin Sampo from the U.S. Tibet Committee. You have 5 minutes, sir.
Please unmute, Mr. Sampo.
Am I okay now? Can you hear me?
Go ahead.
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Well, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak on this important subject, and appreciate the opportunity. As you know, we know that Tibet was an independent country, but China occupied and illegally occupied in the last 61 years, since 1959. So when I talk about the Chinese threat, a lot of people in this country are unaware of what is really the Chinese threat, the communist or the socialist, or what kind of operations they do. For example, in Tibet, before they want to help the Tibetans, so-called liberate Tibet from the old society, but in reality, the Tibetans have been subject to many unspeakable, sufferings and tortures and imprisonment, communist suicide, cultural genocide. I mean, you name it, language, everything has been, taken away from them. And the Tibetan identity has been threatened in the last 61 years. And it's so-called Tibetan Autonomous Region, which is 1/3 of the Tibet, traditionally, is not, there's no any sign or even a symbol of autonomy. Every single policy, every single leaders, the Chinese handpicked and put there. And a lot of times, let alone it's autonomous, but it's harder than in general, in China. A lot of the actually Chinese, when they come to Tibet, and they get also shocks. It looks like, cultural revolution. Young people, when they were born in 80s and 90s, they do not know what is communism is. So I think we all know that the Chinese government has been a threat, not for the Tibetans, but for the East Turkestan, the Mongolians, and the Tibetans, and now to the Hong Kong. What they want is they will try to sneak into, they want to do this, and try to be nice, but in reality, they have single object to destroy your culture, your identity, and make into a Han Chinese population. And that's never going to achieve, of course. No matter where you live in this world, when you are born as a human being, you have the right to speak, you have the right to exercise. And for me, luckily, I came out more than 6 years ago from Chinese occupation. And in the last 35 years, I have been speaking on behalf of the Tibetans who have no voice whatsoever, and they have been constantly under threat and monitored. We are not able to communicate. Tibetans were locked down, not just because of this COVID, but the Tibetans has been locked down ever since 1959, and very few Tibetans, even less than 1% Tibetans, they had passport before 2012. Those Chinese, they consider, as a no threat. So the Tibetans are not giving a passport to travel, or they say what they want. And since 2012, the Chinese government, because there was some kind of a lot of Tibetans went to in India to receive teachings of the Dalai Lama in India. Once they returned to Tibet, more than 2,000 Tibetans were incarcerated, or Tibetans' passport has been confiscated. So now these days, you only see 1 or 2 Tibetans either live in the Chinese province, or maybe they are they fooled the Chinese government that they did not have a passport, and they're telling them that this is passport they have. So anyway, Chinese have been treating the Tibetans as a second-class citizen. Tibetans have never had the opportunity to be themselves, to embrace their culture, language. Even the Tibetans who live in the West. Recently there's a Chinese guy who came into the in the United States, and now he's spying in the Tibetan community in the West, in New York, where I live right now, and had been, luckily he was apprehended, and there are a lot of threats, and the Chinese are listening to our conversations when we call, or anything is monitored. So what my advice to the greater world of our community here in America and elsewhere, the China threat we cannot take easily. It's a threat for our national security, it's our liberty, our economic threat, military, diplomatic. So we cannot just be nice to them and try to be treat them as a civilized. Chinese government has never been a civilized, so we have to be upfront and at their face. Otherwise, they will fool us, and we will be, regretting. We already, I think, we have been talking this Chinese threat in the last 30 years. I remember back in Seattle and here in the United States, until now, everyone thinks that there's no threat to the Chinese, and now we are seeing how dangerous it is, militarily, economically, and diplomatically. We have to wake up. The world has to wake up, especially the United States. If the United States doesn't stand up, the Europeans or other countries, Asians or the Africans or the South America, they have no power. So we must have a firm commitment to understand and respect the international, human rights, and we should have the utmost vigilant what the Chinese do. We cannot say it's far away, thousands of miles. They are every single in our society and in every aspect of life. We have to be, so I'm glad to participate and to understand how it works. We have been, protesting the so-called, China boycott, but now that the Bryans and the Rick and the Rogers were talking about, the major things that we can do financially, politically, and that's encouraging. So I think we have to act together as a group and confront the Chinese up front. Otherwise, we will be having huge regret and maybe too late to tell the truth. So I'm glad to have this opportunity. I'll give it the floor to the next speaker. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Tenzaba. That was very, very powerful. It's as people would know, is that the situation in Tibet has been a very dire one for many decades now. And fortunately, we were able to know about it. And it's really powerful to be able to hear you just related to even the threats that we face today. So over to our next panel. I would like to introduce our Mr. Ilshad Hassan Kopur, who is, again, he's the China Affairs Director at the World Uyghur Congress, and to share his testimony as well as the Uyghur situation in occupied East Turkestan, done and the atrocities that are happening currently to the Uyghur people, as well as the Kazakhs and the Kyrgyz and all the other Turkic folks that are in there right now. So, Mr. Elcha Hassan, whenever you're ready. You might be mute.
You may be muted, sir.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Thank you. First of all, thank you, President and Vice President from Present Tender Committee, and also Sing Hong Kim and Didi, everyone organizing this event and give us a platform to voice the voiceless people under the communist tyranny. Months ago, I was giving a presentation to an India organization hosted a conference, and I told them, if not the East Turkestan and Tibet and some other captive nation was occupied by China, the Chinese with India's border problem shouldn't happen, shouldn't exist. And since 1949, the Chinese Communist government occupied the East Turkestan. Before that, we have our independence, we have our national army. In the one flight, so-called Soviet Union with the communist China plotted to kill all of our East Turkestan republic's leadership. Uyghur, Kazakh, Kyrgyz, they all died in a one so-called flight accident, and then we were under the communists. Since then, they started to mass killing, incarcerate all the Uyghurs who are trying to keep their culture, identity. From my personal, my grandpa, he was an imam, a religious Islam scholar in his small mountain village mosque. When I grew up in 1960s, and I found out my grandpa was doing carpenter in his mosque. Now we are facing again. So many mosques was demolished, destroyed, and only left a few to show to the world the communist propaganda. And personally, from my own experience, since 2016, last time in August, I speak to my mother. Until now, it's almost more than 4 years. I lost any connection with my mother. She is almost 82 years old. And I have 3 sisters. One of my elder sisters, she was arrested in 2014 because I am doing human rights work in United States. They tried to stretch their hand and threaten me by arresting my sister. Actually, after I ran away from East Turkestan in 2003, in 2004, the Chinese police instigated a Chinese mob, killed my brother, younger brother, in a restaurant in daylight. So I lost my brother, younger one, and 3 sisters, they disappeared. And my mother. Imagine any American, when you get up in a Saturday morning or Sunday, as a living in a civilized world, in a technology developed country, you can call all the corner of the world to speak to your mother, speak to your father, or speak to your family member. share your happiness, tell them your sadness. But today, as a nation, Uyghur, Kazakh, Kyrgyz, who are from East Turkestan, we lost this, the fundamental right of to call our parents, call our relatives. We can't. I have a 6-year-old daughter. One day, when I pick up her from kindergarten, she asked me, Dad, do I have grandpa, grandma? Do I have any uncle? Can I talk to them? As a father, I have to tell her, no.
Mr. Shah, thank you very much for that. Due to some time, we'll be able to just continue on later on. We just need to get to the other panelists, but that was very powerful. We'll be able to, again, we'll be able to continue it on in a little bit. So thank you. And I apologize for the short break. Now, for our next panelist, I'd like to introduce Mr. Enkibat Tokchok of Father Mongolian Information Center. If you're not speaking, your thing, please. Microphone. Thank you so much. And Mr. Enkibat, whenever you're ready.
Yep. Good evening, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank the Committee on the Present Danger China for inviting us and giving us this opportunity to discuss the issues and the problems we are facing. As Sehun introduced, my name is Enkibat and I'm from Southern Mongolia. Before I discuss most the present issues and challenges the Southern Mongolians are facing today under the Chinese colonial occupation in Southern Mongolia, I would like to give you some historical background of Southern Mongolia. Southern Mongolia, widely known as Inner Mongolia, was an independent and sovereign nation up until 1949, when the Chinese communist regime incorporated it into China by force. As you all know, our great ancestor Genghis Khan and his sons and daughters created the largest contiguous land, empire, and human history, covering more than 33 million square kilometer territory, occupying 22% of the world's total land surface. Southern Mongolia had always been an integral part of and even the heartland of the Mongol nation in history. Two major historical events changed the fate of Southern Mongolia. One is the Yalta Treaty in 1945 that officially partitioned the Mongol nation into independent country of Mongolia and Southern Mongolia. The other major event is the founding of the People's Republic of China, which officially annexed Southern Mongolia into China as a so-called Inner Mongolia Autonomous Region. Since then, Southern Mongolians have been subject to China's all forms of atrocities, including genocide, ethnic cleansing, political purge, economic exploitation, cultural eradication, and environmental destruction. From the late 1960s through early 1970s, the Chinese government carried out a massive genocide campaign in Southern Mongolia. At least 100,000 Mongolians were killed and 500,000 persecuted. The Chinese regime's criminal activities do not stop there. The Southern Mongolian grassland that have nurtured a nomadic civilization for thousands of years have now turned into mining pits as a direct result of China's resource extraction. The CCP is not only maintaining its totalitarian regime at home, but is also extorting the world economically, politically, and militarily with the natural resource planted from Southern Mongolia, which is the source of 95% of world's rare earth production and China's largest graphite, coal, gas, and iron deposit as well as a world-level uranium deposit that can enable China to produce 3 million atomic bombs. So as the final move toward eradication of Mongolian national identity, what the Chinese government is implementing in Southern Mongolia today is a wholesale cultural genocide, which is aiming at the complete eradication of Mongolian language. In response to this new round of cultural genocide, starting late August this year, a region-wide massive civil disobedience resistance movement broke out across Southern Mongolia. Estimated 300,000 students joined the school boycott. About 8 to 10,000 Southern Mongolians have been arrested, detained, and placed under house arrest during the past 2 months. At least 11 Southern Mongolians took their lives in protest of this new policy. So going through all these waves of genocide and other atrocities, Southern Mongolians are firmly believing that the complete national freedom or national independence is the only way to safeguard their fundamental right of survival as a distinct people. Any other form of negotiated conditional freedom will fail to guarantee the right to exist as a nation, as the past 71 years witnessed. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Enkebat, for the powerful words. That really reminds us of the dire situation that we are facing now, and the situation that most of us weren't aware before. So leading to that, it was my honor to introduce Dr. Sean Lin from the Falun Gong community to address a couple of problems, one of which was mentioned earlier, the organ harvesting issue that's going on under the directives of the CCP. And the Falun Gong issue has been probably on the forefront for many, many years to shed light on this issue. So it's my distinct honor and privilege to have Dr. Sean to introduce us about the issue in that regard. And Dr. Lin, whenever you're ready.
All right, thank you, Sehong. Can you hear me all?
Yes.
Okay, great. So my name is Sean Lin. I'm an advisor for the nonprofit organization Doctors Against Forced Organ Harvesting, and also a Falun Gong practitioner and director of communication for Falun Dafa Association in Washington, D.C. And thank you for Frank, Brian, and Dee for organizing these panels, and congratulations for Sehong for your wonderful work on the Catholic nation. So regarding about Falun Gong, yes, it's a wonderful practice deeply rooted in the traditional Chinese culture. And it was very popular in the 1990s, reached more than 70 million people following this practice until this Chinese Communist Party brutally banned and persecuted the whole group of Falun Gong. So the persecution has lasted for 21 years, and millions of Falun Gong practitioners have been subject to tortures, detentions, and lost their jobs, and also serious sentence, and many of them lost their lives. And many international human rights organizations have systematic report about Falun Gong practitioners' sufferings, and also we know Falun Gong's persecution has been documented in the annual reports in Department of State's annual religious reports. So the persecution is very severe, and many organizations have noticed that Falun Gong practitioners were particularly risky to extrajudicial killing. And so one of the biggest crimes has been exposed, committed by the Chinese Communist Party, CCP, is the organ harvesting. Regarding this organ harvesting, now actually this reality that the Falun Gong practitioners are being killed and for their organs inside China is now widely accepted among human rights organizations, even policymakers, and academic circles. You know, in 2016, the United States House Representatives unanimously passed House Resolution 343, which expressing concerns regarding about persistent and credible reports of systematic and state-sanctioned organ harvesting from Falun Gong practitioners in large numbers. And also we know in 2019, Sir Jeffrey Nice QC, a former prosecutor at the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, who led the persecution of Slobodan Milosevic, convened an independent tribunal of medical, legal, and China experts in London. So after assessing all the evidence, the panel concluded that Falun Gong practitioners were and continue to be cured for their organs on a very significant scale and with beyond reasonable doubt. So this report was very shocking to the whole world, and is very alarming. And this report was also submitted to the UN Human Rights Commission. But however, so far, the UN has not responded to this serious, statement. And at the same time, we also noticed that China was actually re-elected to the UN Human Rights Commission. It was such an ironic election result. Of course, it's manipulated by the Chinese Communist Party inside the UN system. And we also know that WHO, World Health Organization, has also helped the Chinese Communist Party in covering up this heinous crime. Under CCP's, you call it persuasive power, or their money's power, the WHO's officers has visited China many times, and under the persuasion of CCP, they established a task force for the donation and transplantation of human organs and tissues. This is a special task force in WHO. However, 2 Chinese medical experts were invited to this panel, to this task force, and both of them are heavily engaged in organ harvesting, especially Dr. Huan Jiehu. Dr. Huan Jiehu was actually the leading front for Chinese government's propaganda on organ donation systems, and also a front person in covering up the organ harvesting. It's a very sad situation.
Sorry, yes, Dr. Shanlin, thank you so much for that. So we do have to move along to the other panelists, but we will have the opportunity to share a little more after all the panelists are introduced. So
thank you.
Now, thank you, Dr. Shanlin. Now I have the distinct privilege of introducing the youngest member of our panel today, Joyce Ho, who is currently a freshman in the New York University, and who has been probably on one of the forefronts of the whole Hong Kong movement within the United States, and probably is a rising star among her generation today. So she's currently the founder and the president of the Project Black Mask. And without further ado, Joyce, take it away.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for having me here tonight. It's an absolute honor to be sitting on a panel with so many inspirational people, and I just want to thank everybody who put this together. It's just an absolute honor to be here. And so my name is Joyce Ho. I was born and raised in New York City, and I am a proud Hong Konger who spent the past 1.5 years protesting and advocating for the democracy and human rights of my fellow Hong Kongers. And 1 year ago, 2 million Hong Kongers peacefully protested on the streets of Hong Kong against the extradition bill, and they inspired a global revolution. And Hong Kongers didn't suddenly just go onto the streets in such large numbers against the extradition bill that would allow for Hong Kongers to be extradited to China. They had been fighting since 2015 for the umbrella movement that fought for the right of universal suffrage, and then the fishbowl revolution of 2017 that fought for the protection of Hong Kong culture that the government was trying to eradicate. And all of these different instances triggered Hong Kongers to be politically aware and prepared to stand up to fight for their human rights. So after all the struggle in 2015 and then 2017, the people of Hong Kong realized that in 2019 it would be really difficult to initiate peaceful tactics against the government. But they tried to, and the only response that they received was police brutality that was supported by the government and made Hong Kong a police state that was backed by the Chinese government. And we all know that the Chinese government will stop at nothing to suppress the voices of those who desire basic rights. So the Hong Kong protests erupted into last resort violent retaliation that was fueled by the younger generation against their government. And this, I would argue, justifiable violence was spurred on by the ignorance of the Hong Kong government to its own people's needs and expectations. 1 million people protested, they were ignored. 2 million people protested, and they were ignored again. So Hong Kongers were forced into the very hopeless and extreme place where they needed to get the government to listen, despite supposedly having a democratic government. And then by the time the summer of 2020 came around, these tactics continued to be employed because the Hong Kong government continued to disregard the needs of its people. And on July 1st of 2020, the national security law was passed in Hong Kong, and it really exterminated any sort of freedom that Hong Kongers could have. And this law, in short, forbid any acts of subversion and gave the police forces absolute power to suppress any kind of resistance against the Hong Kong government. And so anybody could be charged over anything, and you could wear a black shirt or be a young person, and it could be considered a violation of the law. So we all can see that at this point, the Chinese government has overextended its power into Hong Kong and has been using surveillance systems and even trying to collect DNA samples of Hong Kongers to demonstrate its desire for absolute power over a city that was once promised to be ruled under one country, two systems. So Hong Kong has become a jail for its citizens. And over the past year, Hong Kong has only deteriorated, and the younger generation has thrown their lives onto the line in order to fight for their home. And some of them have even written wills demonstrating their willingness to die for freedom and their expectation of what it takes to die, to fight for this. And as a member of the younger generation and as an American citizen, I've been inspired by them after hearing about their determination. And Hong Kong will not stop at anything to achieve its final goal of conquering the world. Their ambition doesn't stop at Tibet, Hong Kong, Taiwan, or even the East. It will continue to terrorize the world until it achieves ultimate power. Hong Kongers have a saying that we are all Hong Kongers to highlight the fact that the danger that the Chinese government poses to our world makes us all Hong Kongers. And since we are all now Hong Kongers, I think that it's quite important for all of us to join together and fight against the enemy that the CCP has made of itself. The instances and examples that I used in this speech have only constituted a handful of the crimes that the CCP has committed to the people of Hong Kong. Yet I'm confident that I've painted a clear enough picture to show the inhumanity of the CCP. And Thomas Jefferson once said, when injustice becomes law, resistance becomes duty. And in China, injustice is the law, and they desire to rebuild the world order under this CCP law. And I think consequently, as people of the world, it's really up to us to develop this mindset of resistance against China. Thank you.
Thank you, Joyce. That was extremely powerful. And please know that you're inspiration for many of us out there. So I have now a distinct honor of also recognizing another panelist, Mr. Gani Stambekov, who is the president of the Free Kazakh Society, and he will be explaining to us, sharing with us the plight of the Kazakh people in Kazakhstan under the influence of the Belt and Road Initiative, and what kind of impact that it's been having, not just in Kazakhstan, but all over Central Asia. So, Mr. Gani Stambekov, whenever you're ready.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much for all organizers and everyone who's participating in the webinar. It's my pleasure and honor to be here with you tonight. So I know that many people, unfortunately, they even don't know where is Kazakhstan located or existing of the country called Kazakhstan. I would say that Kazakhstan is the 9th largest country in the world, and it connects Europe and Asia. And all of you know about the BRI program, Belt and Road Initiative, $6 trillion program, and main route of Chinese economic program, expanding program goes through Kazakhstan to Eastern Europe. So Kazakhstan is located in Europe, eastern side and in Central Asia. That is the reason it's very, very important to China, because through Kazakhstan, actually Chinese products goes to Europe twice faster than it used to be with the ports, with the sea routes, etc. So Kazakhstan is very, very important for China. And also I would say that in 2013, Chinese leader Xi Jinping, he actually announced about DRI program in Kazakhstan at Nazarbayev University. So the Chinese leader, he has very big influence over Kazakhstan and has a great impact and great connection with the Kazakh dictatorship regime. So here's quick history. We have a dictatorship regime. That regime actually left from Russian Communist Party. Kazakh people never ever elected them. So Russian Communist leader Gorbachev, he put Nazarbayev as the leader of Communist Party in Kazakhstan, and since that time he used to control and rule Kazakhstan for over 30 years. So he has a good relationship with Russia and with China. Indeed, dictator Nazarbayev once said that it's better to get loans from China rather than from US or Europe, because China never ever gives you money with any kind of terms like human rights or anything else like Europe and America does. So currently Kazakhstan has over 40 to 50 billion Chinese investments and 13 billion of Chinese loans. And this is actually a big scary fact for us, because we know that China, for example, from neighboring country Tajikistan, China gave a lot of loans. Tajik government couldn't pay that loans, and it gave 3% of its land to China. And mainly there are like gold mines, a lot of gold mines. 80% of gold mines nowadays in Tajikistan country belong to China. So something like that is going to happen in Kazakhstan and in Central Asia. Because if Kazakhstan will fall, actually Europe, eastern part, and then other rest of part of Europe will fall as well. So currently China holding over 40% officially, official data says over 40% of oil production in Kazakhstan is under the ownership of China. Non-official data says it's over 70%. China is actually the fourth largest investor in Kazakhstan, according to official data. The first, number one, the investor main biggest in Kazakhstan is Netherlands. So through Netherlands, we got some information that Netherlands has a lot of offshores, and China probably using that offshores and investing through Netherlands to Kazakhstan. So we would say that China is number one investor in Kazakhstan. It is really very scary thing. Nowadays, I can give you the exact number. In 2017, according to official data, in Kazakhstan there are over 2,783 Chinese factories in Kazakhstan with Chinese capital. And they bring a lot of Chinese workers to Kazakhstan. And that workers, they get married to local Kazakhs. This is how they get the citizenship. So China is spending not only economically, but also it's bringing Chinese hands to Kazakhstan. And Kazakh population is very small. It's less than New York State's population. So New York is state 25 million. Kazakhstan is like little over 18 million. Only one city, Shanghai in China, has over 22 million population. So we see here a clear pattern. Let's look to the history. East Turkestan in 1949 it fall under Chinese Communist Party regime. Then Tibet in 1950. Then Southern Mongolia. Then other countries, then other nations, and nowadays is Hong Kong. And then later will be Taiwan and Kazakhstan. So if we will not stop now China, later will be too late. So now we have very big opportunity to unite and push back that Chinese Communist Party. Not only push back, but absolutely to destroy it. And Kazakhstan is very important. Other thing I would say that in East Turkestan, there are not only issue and not only genocide against all Uyghurs that many media is publishing. There are genocide also about ethnic Kazakhs, about Kyrgyz, about Tajiks, about other nations. Indeed, there are 500,000 ethnic Kazakhs right now detained in concentration camps in East Turkestan. Around 50,000 of Kyrgyz people. So we also need to speak up about them, because it's problem not only about Uyghur It's a problem about all native nations of East Turkestan. And if we will not stop China, they will keep expanding. So now we have the right time when we need all unite and destroy this Communist Party. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Let me step in because I will have the privilege of introducing several of our remaining speakers. There is, as we've just heard, a very insidious effort underway by the Chinese Communist Party to extend its dominion, its enslavement around the world. And we're going to hear from representatives of several other parts of the world, having just heard from Ghani about Central Asia. Next, we're going to talk about Europe. We have with us Ratko Knecevich, who is a very distinguished and accomplished international businessman. He is the Chief Strategic Officer of Ateo Group. He has also served as a diplomat and has been a founding member of the Committee on the Present Danger of China. And we've asked him to talk a bit about what's happening in his native region of Europe, the Balkans, but also elsewhere in Europe at the hands of the Chinese Communist Party and this so-called Belt and Road Initiative. Ratko, welcome. Over to you.
Good evening, gentlemen and ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much, Frank, for this invitation and for the chance to talk to the members and other guests. I spent 25 years in investment banking all over the world. 5-6 years I was running EMEA, Europe, Middle East, Africa, one of the largest investment banks in the world, specialized in infrastructure and energy. Would be competitive to Belt and Road, let's say. And now I'm running a African-based but globally reached oil, gas, and mining company. As you may know, Belt and Road was a decent ambition to conquer the world and to invest apparently close to $1 trillion or more, in excess of $1 trillion dollars in 100 countries. Analyzing the reasons why the China Communist Party started that program, I will taxatively mention the goals. The first one is to decrease, and the number one was to decrease dependence of the Chinese investment in the US Treasury bonds. For many, many years, China didn't have idea how to invest money that they made exporting their cheap goods all over the world. And they bought US Treasury bonds. And, that created actually codependency between the US and China. And China decided, one of the reasons why they stopped Belt and Road is actually they decided to divest the investments from US Treasury bonds. The second one, they like to export their cheap labor and to indebted small independent nations. I will talk more about that later on. The third one is the acquisition of the majority or significant amount of stakes in the strategically important industries and companies relevant for further advance of the China economy and industry, especially if they can copy and paste advanced technology in that process. The fourth one is really interesting one, and I will talk more about that. It's a program called China Plus 60. It's a special division of Belt and Road program that actually targeting ex-socialistic countries, some of them already members of the European